A desperate father writes 4 letters to 4 strangers offering his daughters like merchandise to save his dying estate. 3 never write back. Only one man rides through the storm, and he doesn't choose the beautiful one. He chooses the invisible one, the one with dirt under her nails and fire in her eyes. But what she doesn't know is that his first wife didn't leave him. She's buried 30 yards from the bedroom window. And the man who killed her? He lives 10 miles down the road. This is the story of a woman who was sold into a stranger's war and ended up winning it with nothing but truth, patience, and a pair of hands everyone underestimated. Welcome to Cowboy Dusk channel, where the sun sets slow, love runs deep, and every story carries the dust and heart of the Wild West. This story reminds us that real strength is not carrying everything alone. It's trusting someone enough to share the weight. And sometimes the person nobody chooses becomes the one who changes everything. If this story stirred something in you, leave a comment and tell me. Would you have walked through that door? Hit like, share it with someone who needs to hear this, and subscribe to Cowboy Dusk so you never miss a sunset. The rain came down like judgment. It hammered the shingled roof of the Whitmore estate, though calling it an estate was generous for what the place had become. Once it had been something proud. Painted columns, straight fences, shutters that hung true. Now the columns peeled like sunburned skin, the shutters hung crooked as a drunk man's smile, and the fences leaned against each other, held up more by habit than integrity. Inside, Gerald Whitmore paced the parlor with the manic energy of a man whose last option had expired 6 months ago. "He is late." Gerald pulled his watch from his vest pocket for the 5th time in as many minutes. Mercer said sunset. "It is past sunset." "It is raining, Father." Lydia Whitmore's voice carried the practiced patience of a woman who had learned early not to irritate a desperate man. She sat near the fire, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap like she was sitting for a portrait. And in a way, she was. She had spent 3 hours preparing. The blue silk dress that matched her eyes, the careful arrangement of blonde curls, rose water dabbed at her throat and wrists. She looked expensive. That was the whole point. "Rain or not," Gerald snapped, "a man of business keeps his word. If he does not come, we are finished. The bank will not wait past November, and November is breathing down our necks." Hannah Whitmore stood in the doorway between the parlor and the kitchen. Neither fully in the room nor fully out of it. It was a position she had perfected over 22 years. Present enough to be useful, invisible enough to be forgotten. She wore brown. She always wore brown or gray. Colors that did not stain, did not show dirt, did not draw the eye. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun. Her hands were clean, but the nails were short and functional, still carrying the ghost of the mud she had been working in an hour ago, reinforcing the chicken coop against the storm. Hannah, the tea. Gerald snapped his fingers without looking at her. "Make sure it is hot. And for the sake of all that is holy, stay in the kitchen when he arrives. Lydia will pour." "Yes, Father." She turned toward the kitchen, familiar disappointment settling in her chest like old furniture. "So long there you stopped noticing the weight." Earlier that evening, taking the trash out to the burn pile, Hannah had found something that made her stomach drop. A crumpled letter in her father's handwriting. Not 1 letter, 4. 4 nearly identical letters sent to 4 different men across the Western Territories offering the same arrangement. 2 daughters and an estate in need of rescue. 3 men never wrote back. Caleb Mercer was the only one who responded. Her father was not selecting from options. He was clinging to the only rope thrown to a drowning man. Lydia caught Hannah's eye as she passed. For just a moment, something like pity flickered across her sister's perfect face. Then it was gone, replaced by the bright, expectant smile she had been rehearsing in the mirror. "If he chooses me," Lydia whispered, "I promise I will send money back for you." Hannah looked at her sister. "If he chooses you, just promise me you will survive it." Something heavy and unspoken passed between them. Then Hannah disappeared into the kitchen with the teapot, and Lydia turned back to the fire, and both sisters waited for the sound that would change everything. The thunder cracked so loud it rattled the windows. Then, through the rain, came hooves. Gerald froze mid-pace. Lydia's hands flew to her hair, smoothing invisible wrinkles. Hannah stepped deeper into the shadow of the kitchen doorway, the teapot warm against her ribs. The knock, when it came, was solid, deliberate. The knock of a man accustomed to doors opening for him. Gerald straightened his vest, composed his face into something approaching dignity, and pulled open the door. Caleb Mercer stood on the porch like something carved from the storm itself. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block the entire doorway. His hands were large, scarred across the knuckles, and they had clearly spent more years holding reins than teacups. Water streamed from his hat and coat, pooling at his boots. He was maybe 40, maybe older. The kind of sun weathered that made exact age irrelevant. His face was all hard angles, a jaw sharp enough to cut rope, and eyes the color of a winter sky, pale, cold, assessing everything in one efficient sweep. He did not smile. "Mr. Whitmore." His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting orders across open range. "Mr. Mercer!" Gerald's enthusiasm was too loud, too bright, like a lamp turned up past its limit. "Please, come in, come in. Terrible night for riding. I have ridden through worse." Caleb stepped inside, removing his hat. His gaze swept the room in one movement. The faded curtains, the threadbare carpet, the fire that could not quite fight the damp. He catalogued every sign of decay the way a man reads land, looking for what is true beneath what is shown. Then his eyes landed on Lydia. She rose from her chair, firelight catching the silk of her dress, her smile warm and welcoming and perfect. "Mr. Mercer, what an honor. I am Lydia Whitmore." She extended her hand with practiced grace. Caleb took it, nodded once, released it without comment. Hannah watched from the shadows, teapot in hand, as her father launched into the speech he had clearly been rehearsing for days. The Whitmore legacy. 2,000 acres of the finest grazing land, timber rights, water access, temporary setbacks, the need for fresh capital and partnership. Caleb listened without expression. Then he set down the teacup Lydia had poured him, the china clicking against the saucer with a sound like finality. "You need money," Caleb said flatly, "and I need a wife. Your letter was clear enough about the arrangement, so I will ask directly. Which daughter are you selling?" The bluntness made Gerald flinch, but he recovered. "Naturally, I thought you would prefer Lydia. She is educated in all the domestic arts. Needlework, music, household management. She speaks French and maintains correspondence with the finest families in the county and—" "I did not ask for her resume," Caleb interrupted. "I asked which one you are selling." The silence was suffocating. Gerald's rehearsed smile tightened. "Mr. Mercer, I understand that frontier business is more direct than what we are accustomed to here in Virginia, but I assure you, Virginia is 3 weeks behind me, and I have got a ranch that will not run itself." Caleb leaned forward. "I came because your letter said you had a daughter willing to head west. I need a woman who can work, not one who can play piano. So I will ask again, which daughter, and what is she worth to you?" Gerald flushed red and began reciting Lydia's qualities like a man reading from an auction catalog. Caleb cut through every word with the same flat question. Can she mend a fence, birth a calf, slaughter a chicken, treat a horse for colic? With each question, Lydia's composure cracked further. She looked to her father, lost. "What about the other one?" Every eye in the room turned to Hannah. She felt the weight of attention like a hand pressed against her chest. Caleb crossed the room toward her. His boots were heavy on the worn floorboards. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to make her want to step back, but she held her ground. "You have been quiet," he said. "I was not asked to speak, Mr. Mercer." Something that might have been approval flickered in those pale eyes. "I am asking now, can you mend a fence?" "Yes, sir." "Wire or rail? Birth a calf?" I have pulled 6, lost 1, slaughter a chicken. I process 20 a week for sale in town. The shift in his attention was physical, like a compass needle swinging toward true north. Who reinforced the west supports on that barn? He asked. I noticed the work riding in. Recent. Well done. Gerald jumped in quickly. I hired a man to handle... I did. Hannah's voice cut through her father's lie like a blade through butter. She had never interrupted him before, not once in 22 years. But something about this man's direct gaze, the way he was asking real questions and expecting real answers, unlocked something inside her. I did it. Last summer. By myself. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Gerald's hand came fast. An open palm across Hannah's face, her head snapped sideways. Blood bloomed where her teeth cut the inside of her lip. She stood perfectly still, the taste of copper mixing with something else, something that felt like the end of an old road. Gerald's voice shook with fury. You will not speak out of turn in my house. You will not contradict... He never finished the sentence. Caleb Mercer stood, slowly. The room seemed to shrink around him as he crossed the space between himself and Gerald. He placed one scarred hand on the older man's shoulder and squeezed, not a grip of friendship, a grip that said very clearly what the next grip would do. His voice was barely above a whisper. You do that again, and I will break your hand. That is not a threat, Mr. Whitmore. Where I come from, we call that a promise. Gerald went white as milk. Lydia's hand covered her mouth, and Hannah stood with the blood on her lip and fire in her eyes, watching this stranger, this storm-made flesh, choose restraint over violence for her sake. She noticed his hands were shaking, not from anger, from the effort of not doing more. In that moment, Hannah understood something about Caleb Mercer that her father and sister would never see. He was not controlled because he was calm. He was controlled because he was dangerous. And the fact that he chose restraint for her meant something she was not ready to name. Caleb released Gerald, stepped back, settled his hat on his head. I will sleep in your barn tonight. I will take 3 days to see your operation and make my choice. He nodded to both daughters. Ladies. Then he walked out into the storm. The moment the door closed, Gerald exploded. He blamed Hannah. He hit her again, harder, across the ribs where the mark would not show. He ordered her to stay invisible, stay silent, stay in the kitchen where she belonged. Hannah took it. She had been taking it for years. But something had shifted inside her, cracked open like frozen ground in early spring. And she knew with the certainty of sunrise that she would never take it again. That night, after Gerald had drunk himself to sleep and Lydia had retreated to her room, Hannah stood alone at the parlor window. Through the rain, she could see lantern light flickering in the barn. Caleb Mercer, sleeping among horses rather than sitting at her father's table. A man whose hands shook from the effort of keeping his violence leashed. A man who looked at her and asked what she could do instead of how she looked doing it. Her cheek throbbed. Her ribs ached. And somewhere in her chest, dangerous as a loaded gun, something stirred that she recognized with the precision of a woman who had learned to identify threats early. Hope. The most dangerous thing of all, because Caleb Mercer had secrets. She had seen them flash behind those winter eyes like lightning behind clouds. There and gone before you could trace the shape. And Hannah Whitmore, who had survived 22 years by reading the things people tried to hide, knew one thing for certain. Whatever Caleb Mercer was running from was worse than what she was running to. Caleb had not slept. Not because of the straw mattress or the cold or the horses shifting in their stalls, because every time he closed his eyes he saw 2 bruises, the one blooming on Hannah Whitmore's cheek tonight, and the one that had darkened Margaret's jaw 7 years ago, the morning before he left for Helena, the morning before everything ended. He had done nothing about Margaret's bruise. It had not come from a fist. She had walked into the barn door, she said. Clumsy, she said. But Caleb had seen the way Crane's foreman had been watching her at the supply depot the week before, had seen the way the man positioned himself between Margaret and the exit. had seen and done nothing because he had cattle to buy and a ranch to run, and Margaret was strong enough to handle herself. Crane's men arrived 12 hours after Caleb rode out. He would carry that arithmetic for the rest of his life. One bruise he ignored. One woman he lost. He would not make that calculation again. The real reason Caleb needed a wife had nothing to do with loneliness. Silas Crane, the man who owned the ranch 10 miles east, was using territorial homestead provisions to challenge Caleb's water rights. Under current law, a married man with an established household had stronger legal standing than a bachelor. Caleb needed a wife the way a fort needs walls, not for comfort, for survival. He had told himself this was strategy, nothing more. But watching Hannah Whitmore take a slap without flinching, watching her stand in that doorway with blood on her lip and defiance in her eyes, Caleb had felt something crack open inside him that he thought he had sealed shut 7 years ago. He pushed the feeling down, buried it the way he had buried Margaret, under oak roots and silence and the kind of shame that eats a man from the inside out. Dawn came gray and cold. Hannah was in the barn before sunrise. She did not see Caleb at first, sitting in the shadows of the last stall, curry comb idle in his hand. She moved through her chores with the efficiency of long practice, collecting eggs, feeding the pigs, checking water troughs, each motion sure and unhurried. "Your father hit you." She stilled. Her hand rested on the bucket handle. She did not turn around. "He was upset," she said carefully, "about the arrangement not going as he planned. Because I paid attention to the wrong daughter. Because you paid attention at all, Mr. Mercer. Most men would have taken my father's recommendation, signed the papers, and been done with it. I am not most men. I am beginning to understand that." They looked at each other in the dim barn light. Something passed between them that was not attraction, not yet, but recognition. The way two people who have survived hard things can look at each other and know without words exactly how much the other one is carrying. Over the next 3 days, Caleb tested both daughters the way a man tests land before buying it. Not with cruelty, but with the thorough, unsentimental eye of someone who understood that the difference between surviving and not often came down to what you could do with your hands when everything else failed. Gerald orchestrated performances for Lydia. The green dress, the garden tour, the flower arrangements and perfect table settings and polite conversation about music and literature and the finer points of Virginia society. Caleb watched it all with the patience of a man observing weather he could not control. Then he would find Hannah. She was always working, mending fence, mucking stalls, checking the root cellar where provisions were dangerously low, 3 barrels of potatoes already going soft, enough salt pork to maybe last until January if they stretched it thin. He walked the property with her for 2 hours on the first day. Every lie Gerald told, Hannah quietly corrected. The fields had not been grazed in 3 years. The soil was depleted. The timber rights were restricted by a 15-year contract Gerald had conveniently forgotten to mention. She showed him a creek running lower than it should. "The water flow dropped 2 years ago," she said. "Something changed upstream. Father would not let me investigate, said it was not a woman's concern." Caleb's expression went very still at that. "Who owns the land north of here? I do not know. Father keeps those documents locked in his study." He filed that away without comment. But Hannah noticed the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went distant for just a moment, as if the name of a ghost had brushed past him in the wind. On the second day, something happened that surprised Caleb. Lydia found him alone by the south fence and spoke to him without her father's script. "I know what you are doing, Mr. Mercer, testing us like horses at auction. And I know I am losing. But I want you to understand something. I am not weak. I was trained for a different war. The fact that my weapons are charm and conversation instead of fence wire and livestock does not make them less real. It just makes them useless to you." Caleb looked at her with genuine respect for the first time. "You are smarter than your father gives you credit for, Miss Whitmore. That is not a high bar, Mr. Mercer." He almost smiled. Almost. That evening, Gerald hit Hannah again, out of Caleb's sight this time, across the ribs where the bruise would hide beneath her dress. Hannah wrapped her own ribs with torn cloth that night, her hands steady even as rage burned through her like brush fire. She swallowed it, the way she always did. Not yet. Not here. On the third morning, Caleb found Hannah in the barn loft, hammering a loose board into place. He climbed up, stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him in the cold air. "What do you want, Hannah?" First time he used her given name. It startled her into looking at him directly. "Sir?" Not what is practical, not what is necessary. If you could have anything, any life at all, what would you choose? The question was so foreign she almost could not process it. Nobody had ever asked her what she wanted. They asked what she could do, what she could fix, what she could carry. "I would want to matter," she whispered. "Not because I am useful, because someone actually valued who I am instead of what I can do for them." The silence between them was long and heavy with truth. Then Caleb spoke, and what he said was not romantic, not gentle, not pretty. "I need a wife for legal reasons, a water rights dispute with a neighbor. A married man has stronger claim under territorial law. I am choosing you because you will survive the work, and you will not fall apart when things get hard. I am not offering romance. I am offering fairness, partnership, and half ownership of everything we build together." Hannah absorbed this. The honesty of it was almost more than she could bear. After a lifetime of pretty lies and broken promises, here was a man offering her the plain, ugly truth. "I accept," she said, "on one condition. Name it." "I need to know what happened to your first wife." The change in Caleb was immediate, a door closing behind his eyes, a wall going up, brick by brick, in the space of a single breath. "She left," he said. "Could not handle frontier life. Went back east." He did not meet her eyes when he said it. Hannah Whitmore had spent 22 years learning to read lies on her father's face. She knew the taste of deception, the way a horse knows bad water. And right now, Caleb Mercer was lying to her with every cell in his body. She accepted anyway. Because anywhere was better than here. Because a hard truth tomorrow was better than a soft lie today. Because she could see, behind the wall he was building, the outline of something broken that matched the shape of her own damage. "I will marry you, Caleb Mercer," she said, her voice steadier than her heart. "But you should know something about me. I can survive brutal truth. What I cannot survive is a gentle lie. And right now, you are telling me one." He nodded, but he did not look her in the eye. And that told Hannah everything she needed to know about the man she had just agreed to spend her life with. He was honest about everything, except the thing that mattered most. Hannah Whitmore put on the only blue dress she owned to marry a stranger, and the strongest thing she felt was not fear. It was relief, like she had been wearing a chain made of velvet her whole life, and someone had finally cut it with a knife instead of flowers. The morning of the announcement, Gerald Whitmore's fury was a living thing. It filled the parlor like smoke, choking the air, turning his face purple and his hands into fists. "You manipulative little creature," he snarled at Hannah. "Everything I planned, everything I arranged, and you sabotaged it. You poisoned him against your own sister." Caleb stepped between Gerald and his daughters. The movement was unhurried but absolute, like a fence post driven into the ground. "I chose a partner, Mr. Whitmore. You offered me merchandise. There is a difference." Hannah found her voice. For the first time in her life, she spoke to her father without the filter of obedience. "I do not want your money, Father. I never did. I wanted you to see me, to value me for something other than my ability to fix your mistakes, but you never could, and you never will. So I am choosing someone who does." Gerald's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Then Lydia, beautiful Lydia, who had every reason to be bitter and broken by this outcome, stood beside her younger sister. Shoulder to shoulder, united front. She is right, Father. You abandoned us years ago. When you started drinking. When you gambled away our security. When you decided your pride mattered more than our survival. Hannah is just the first one brave enough to leave. Gerald looked at his daughters as though seeing them for the first time. Or perhaps for the last. Caleb laid out his terms with the flat efficiency of a man closing a cattle deal. He would settle Gerald's most pressing debts, the bank mortgage and the immediate creditors, enough to buy 6 months of breathing room. It is more than you deserve, Caleb said. And it is the only offer you are getting. You will sign the marriage consent, and you will do it without any more theatrics. Or I ride out this morning, and you can explain to the bank in 60 days why they should show mercy. Your choice. Gerald signed. His hand shook so badly the ink smeared. He did not look at Hannah. He did not say goodbye. The wedding was brief, businesslike. The local minister asked the necessary legal questions and nothing more. Gerald stayed in his study with a bottle. Lydia stood beside Hannah, holding her sister's hand, tears running silently down her perfect face. Caleb kissed Hannah's forehead when the minister pronounced them married, a gesture more promise than passion. She became Hannah Mercer, no longer Whitmore, no longer the invisible daughter of a failing house and a disappointing father. The goodbye between the sisters nearly broke Hannah. Lydia pressed their mother's embroidered handkerchief into Hannah's hands. Mama used to say the daughter who cries at her wedding will not cry in her marriage, so cry now, Hannah, get it all out here, Hannah cried. For the first time in the entire story of her life as she knew it, she let the tears come without fighting them. She cried for her mother who died in a cold house because her father could not afford to heat it. She cried for the little girl who once believed her father was the tallest, strongest man in the world. She cried for Lydia, who was staying behind in a house that was sinking like a ship with no one at the wheel. Then Lydia leaned close. Her whisper was urgent, almost lost beneath the sound of horses being hitched to the wagon. There is something Father is hiding, about the land north of ours. I heard him talking to someone. A name. Crane. I do not know what it means, but please, Hannah, be careful. Hannah filed the name away alongside Caleb's lie about Margaret. 2 secrets, 2 debts she intended to collect. Be brave, Hannah told her sister. Find your own way out. I will. You showed me how. The journey west took 3 weeks by wagon, then another week by rail. Hannah watched the landscape transform through the train window. Rolling hills giving way to endless plains. Forests thinning to grassland. The sky growing bigger with every passing mile until it swallowed everything, vast and overwhelming and beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. Caleb sat beside her. He pointed out landmarks, explained the geography, answered her questions about the ranch with the straightforward honesty of a man discussing business. But when the conversation turned personal, he retreated behind that wall of his, solid and high and built from something Hannah could not yet name. They were 3 days past the Mississippi when the road agents found them. It was a narrow pass through hill country, timber close on both sides, the kind of place that made the back of your neck prickle with animal warning. Caleb had his hand on his rifle before Hannah even registered the 3 riders blocking the trail. They were rough men, armed, not desperate drifters, but calculating professionals who had chosen this ground with purpose. The leader raised his hand with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Easy, Mercer. We are just collecting a road tax. Hannah's blood went cold. He knew Caleb's name. Caleb's face hardened into something Hannah had not seen before. Not fear, recognition, and rage, lashed so tight she could see the cords in his neck straining with it. Hannah acted before thinking could slow her down. Their real money was hidden in the lining of her carpet bag and the inside pocket of her corset, a trick she had learned from her mother, who had learned it from a grandmother who survived the war. She pulled out the small purse she had kept visible on purpose, holding just a few dollars of spending money, and held it out with trembling hands she did not have to fake. Please, she said in a voice pitched high with theatrical fear. That is all we have. Please do not hurt us. The leader took it, counted the thin bills, looked disappointed but not surprised. Then he turned his horse and over his shoulder delivered the line that changed everything. Give our regards to your new wife, Mercer. Hope this one lasts longer than the last. The outlaws disappeared into the timber. Silence settled around the wagon like dust after a stampede. Hannah's hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. They knew your name. They knew about your first wife. Who were those men, Caleb? Road agents? Common enough out here. Road agents do not deliver personal messages. Who sent them? Caleb did not answer. His hands on the reins were white-knuckled, and the silence between them stretched taut as fence wire. Hannah understood in that moment, with the clarity that comes from years of reading dangerous men, that she had not simply married a rancher. She had married into a war, and no one had told her before the vows. A week later, the night before they reached Montana, Hannah woke in the darkness of a railroad hotel to the sound of Caleb thrashing beside her. He was calling a name. Margaret. But not the way a man calls for a woman who left him. He called it the way a man calls for someone dying. The way you scream into a wound that will not close. There was anguish in his voice that went beyond abandonment, beyond loneliness, into something raw and primal and terrible. Hannah lay perfectly still, listening, and knew with the certainty of sunrise that Margaret Mercer had not gone back to Philadelphia. Margaret Mercer was dead, and whatever had killed her was still waiting for them in Montana. The train crested the final pass the next afternoon, and the territory opened below them like a revelation. Mountains like broken teeth against an infinite sky. Grassland rolling to every horizon like a golden ocean with no shore. Wind that hit the train windows with the force of something alive, something untamed, something that had never been conquered and did not intend to start. Hannah pressed her hand against the cold glass and thought about three things. A man who screamed a dead woman's name in his sleep. Outlaws who delivered messages from enemies she had not met. And her sister's whispered warning. Crane. Somewhere out there, in all that terrible beauty, the answers were waiting. And Hannah Mercer intended to find every single one. The Mercer Ranch was not beautiful the way Hannah had known beauty. It was beautiful the way a rifle is beautiful. Clean, certain, built for one purpose only, to endure. They arrived on a gray afternoon in late November. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop on a rise, and Hannah saw it spread below them in the valley. A solid two-story house of timber and stone, smoke rising from the chimney. Barns and outbuildings arranged with military precision. Fences stretching in neat lines across rolling grassland. And in the distance, cattle moving like dark shapes against the brown grass, 200 head at least. Everything spoke of careful planning, consistent maintenance. A man who built things to last and maintained them through sheer will and unrelenting work. There, Caleb said. His voice carried a satisfaction he rarely showed. Home. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled into the yard. Tall, lean, around 45, with a weathered face and eyes sharp as a hawk. He raised a hand in greeting and approached with long, confident strides. Boss, did not expect you back for another few days. Made good time. Caleb set the brake and jumped down. Hannah, this is James Cooper, my foreman. Everyone calls him Coop. Coop, meet my wife. Mrs. Mercer. Cooper's eyebrows rose exactly 1/4 of an inch. It was the most surprise Hannah would ever see the man show. Ma'am? He touched his hat brim. Welcome to the ranch. Behind Coop, 7 other men had gathered near the bunkhouse. They ranged from a grizzled old-timer who chewed tobacco like it was a religion to a freckle-faced kid barely out of his teens who looked like he was trying to decide whether to tip his hat or run. The old-timer spoke first. Sam Garrett. He spat tobacco juice in the dirt and fixed Hannah with a stare that could have cured leather. "Hope you can cook better than the last one." Dead silence. Even the wind seemed to pause. Hannah felt every eye on her. She felt Caleb tense beside her, ready to step in, ready to defend. And she made a choice in that moment that would define every day that followed. She stepped forward, looked Sam Garrett straight in the eye, and answered for herself. "I cook well enough to keep 9 men fed through a Montana winter, Mr. Garrett. But more importantly, I can shoot, butcher, and stitch a wound. So if you do not care for supper, you are welcome to cook your own, or hunt your own, soon." The silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then Sam Garrett did something that apparently shocked every man present. He laughed, a real laugh, genuine and surprised, and carrying the unmistakable sound of approval. "Well, all right then," he said. "I reckon she will do." The freckle-faced kid was Thomas Young, 19 years old, eager as a puppy. He practically tripped over himself trying to help carry Hannah's trunk to the house. Sam muttered something to Coop as they watched. "Keep an eye on the boy. He runs hot. Loyalty like his burns fast and cheap." The house was everything Caleb had described. 6 rooms, solid construction, a large stone fireplace dominating the main room, simple but well-made furniture, a table with 8 chairs, worn armchairs near the hearth, shelves lined with books and ledgers. Everything clean but sparse, functional without being comfortable. The kitchen was larger than Hannah expected, with a good stove, plenty of workspace, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. She checked the root cellar and felt her first real surge of relief since leaving Virginia. It was properly stocked. Barrels of potatoes without soft spots, apples wrapped in paper, preserved vegetables in neat rows, smoked meat hanging from the rafters. After 3 years of managing her father's failing stores, watching food rot before she could use it, stretching provisions until they were tissue-thin, this cellar felt like a cathedral. Upstairs, she found 3 bedrooms and a small study. The largest bedroom was clearly Caleb's, his few possessions arranged with military precision. The study held a desk, ledgers, maps of the property tacked to the walls, and at the end of the hall, a door that would not open. Hannah tried the handle. Locked. She looked at it for a long moment. "Storage," Caleb said behind her. She had not heard him come up the stairs. "Old things. Nothing you need in there." His voice was casual, but over his shoulder Hannah saw Coop standing at the bottom of the stairs, and the look in the foreman's eyes was anything but casual. It was worry, sharp and unmistakable. Hannah let it go. For now. That first night, the wind hit the house like a living thing. Wolves howled somewhere in the darkness, and Hannah startled upright in bed before she could stop herself. Beside her, Caleb came awake instantly. His hand shot under the pillow and came out gripping a rifle. His eyes swept the room, the windows, the door, before his body registered that the threat was outside, not in. "Just wolves," he said, easing the rifle back. "They do not come close to the house." But Hannah had seen the reflex, the speed of it, the practiced certainty of a man who had reached for a weapon in the dark before and needed it. This was not the response of someone who feared wolves. This was the response of someone who had been attacked in his own home. She filed it away. Alongside the locked room, alongside the lie about Margaret, alongside the outlaws who knew his name and the sister's whisper about a man called Crane. The evidence was building. She just needed time to read it. Winter came to Montana not like a season, but like a siege. The first blizzard hit in early December. 3 days of whiteout so complete that the barn disappeared behind a wall of white, even though it stood 50 yards from the back door. Hannah learned the frontier survival technique of stringing heavy rope between buildings, tying it to posts and door handles, so you could feel your way through the blinding snow without losing direction. She tied the knots herself, tight, even. Coop watched her work and gave a single nod, which he was learning was the highest form of praise the man offered. The cold was a revelation. Not like Virginia cold, which had teeth but could be reasoned with. This cold was absolute. Water froze in the bucket between the well and the kitchen door. Her breath crystallized in the air and fell like tiny diamonds. The thermometer outside the kitchen window dropped so low the mercury seemed to give up, huddling at the bottom of the glass like a frightened animal. Hannah learned to build fires that lasted through the night. She learned which drafts could be stopped with rags and which could not. She learned to cook for 9 hungry men with the focus and timing of a general managing a campaign. Breakfast at 6 sharp, supper at sundown, everything hot and plentiful and ready on time. The men tested her. Of course they did. Sam tested her with silence and skepticism, eating her food without comment, watching her with those sharp old eyes that missed nothing. Thomas tested her with enthusiasm that bordered on worship, always underfoot, always eager to help, until Hannah had to tell him firmly that she could carry her own water and he should go do his actual job. The others tested her with the careful distance of men who had lived without a woman in their midst for 7 years, and were not entirely sure what to do with one now. And then the wolves came. Not the distant howling she had heard that first night. Real wolves. At the chicken coop. 2 in the morning with Caleb and most of the hands out checking cattle in the far pasture. Hannah woke to the sound of chickens screaming. She was out of bed and down the stairs before her mind fully caught up with her body. She grabbed the shotgun from above the kitchen door, the one Caleb had shown her on the first day, and ran outside in her nightgown and boots into cold that hit her like a wall of knives. The wolf was inside the coop. A big one, gray and lean and desperate with winter hunger. It had torn through the fence where the wire had weakened and was killing chickens with the mechanical efficiency of a predator that knew exactly how little time it had. Hannah raised the shotgun, steadied her breathing the way her grandfather had taught her a lifetime ago in Virginia, and fired once. The wolf dropped. She stood in the snow, barefoot in her boots, nightgown soaked with chicken blood, shotgun still at her shoulder, and did not realize she was being watched until Sam Garrett spoke from the darkness behind her. He had circled back from the cattle check for forgotten gloves. He had seen everything. The speed of her response, the steadiness of her hands, the single clean shot. He said nothing that night. The next morning at breakfast he called her ma'am for the first time. The word carried weight it had not carried before. Like he had taken it out of storage, dusted it off, and decided she had earned it. Calving season came in late February, and the ranch erupted into organized chaos. For 3 weeks, nobody slept more than 4 hours at a stretch. The cows labored in the near pastures, and everyone took shifts, watching, waiting, ready to intervene when things went wrong. Hannah worked alongside the men. She pulled calves when mothers struggled. She treated infections with the supplies Caleb kept stocked in the barn. She bottle-fed the ones whose mothers rejected them, sitting up through the night in the hay with a warm bottle and a calf that weighed more than she did. The breached calf came on the worst night, midnight, temperature well below 0. A cow in distress, her calf coming backward, and Hannah the only one in the barn. She stripped off her coat, rolled up her sleeves, reached into the laboring animal bare-handed, feeling for the legs in the dark warmth, working by lantern light in blood and fluid, and the primal screaming of a creature fighting to give life. She found the legs, got a grip, pulled with everything she had. The calf came out alive, barely, but breathing. Caleb arrived 10 minutes later, having run from the far pasture when Coop sent word. He found Hannah sitting in the straw, blood drying on her arms up to the elbows, the calf nursing weakly at its mother's side. He did not say good work. He did not say you should have waited for help. He sat down beside her in the bloody straw, took her hand, and slowly, carefully, wiped the blood from her forearm with his own handkerchief. It was the first time he had touched her with tenderness. The cloth was rough, but his hands were gentle, and in the exhaustion and the aftermath of crisis, the gesture meant more than any words could have. "You have done this before," he said quietly. "Not at midnight in a Montana barn with the temperature below 0. You did not hesitate." She looked at him. "Neither did you. When you came in, you went straight to the mother, checked her breathing, supported her flank. We moved like we had done this together 100 times." He held her gaze. Something shifted between them in that lantern-lit barn, surrounded by the smell of blood and hay and new life. Not romance. Not yet. But the first real recognition that this partnership was becoming something neither of them had planned. Thomas got kicked by a nervous heifer 2 days later. Hannah set his broken fingers with calm efficiency, using splints she fashioned from kindling wood and strips torn from a flour sack. After that, Sam started calling her Doc, and the name stuck. Spring was still weeks away when Ruth Dawson came from town. Ruthie, as everyone called her, owned the boarding house in the nearest settlement, a 2-hour ride from the ranch. She was 60 years old, built like a rain barrel, with eyes that could spot a lie at 200 yards and a tongue sharp enough to cut tin. She brought supplies and gossip and a fresh apple pie that made the ranch hands fight over the last slice. She was warm with Hannah, friendly, welcoming, but she watched Hannah strangely, like she was comparing her to someone. When Caleb stepped outside to check on a horse, Ruthie leaned close to Hannah in the kitchen, her voice dropping low. "You remind me of her, you know. Not in looks, in the way you carry yourself, like you are always bracing for the next blow." Hannah's hands stilled on the dish she was washing. "Who?" Ruthie's expression shifted. She had said more than she meant to. "Never mind, dear. Just an old woman running her mouth." She changed the subject to pie crust and the price of flour, but the damage was done. Another piece of the puzzle. Another crack in the wall around Caleb's secret. That evening, with Caleb gone to check the far fence line and not expected back until dark, Hannah made her decision. She found the key to the locked room in Caleb's desk drawer underneath the ranch ledgers. Hidden, but not hidden well enough for a woman who had spent years finding the things her father tried to keep from her. She climbed the stairs, fitted the key, turned the lock. The door opened into a room that had not been touched in years. Dust lay thick on every surface. But beneath the dust, the room was preserved like a tomb. A woman's dresses hung in the wardrobe, the fabric faded, but still carrying the faint ghost of perfume. A hairbrush lay on the dresser, auburn hair still caught in the bristles. A cracked hand mirror. A wedding ring, not Hannah's simple gold band, but an older one, more ornate, set with a small garnet. And on the writing desk by the window, a half-finished letter in a woman's handwriting. Hannah picked it up with hands that did not tremble. "Not yet. To the territorial marshal at Fort Benton. I write to report criminal activity by Mr. Silas Crane of Crane Ranch involving deliberate contamination of water sources on Mercer property. On 3 occasions I have observed." The letter stopped mid-sentence. The paper was stained. Something dark and old that might have been water, or might have been blood. Hannah read the letter twice. Then she looked out the window, and from this angle, for the first time, she could see it. A small stone marker underneath the oak tree behind the house. No name carved into it. Just a date. March 14th, 1868. Margaret Mercer had not left. Margaret Mercer had not gone back to Philadelphia. Margaret Mercer was buried 30 yards from where Hannah slept every night, under an oak tree her husband had planted when he first built this house. And the letter she had been writing when she died named the man who killed her. Hannah set the letter down. Her hands were trembling now, not from cold or fear, but from the weight of understanding. She had married a good man. She still believed that. But the good man had buried his first wife under an oak tree, locked her belongings in a room, told the world she abandoned him, and brought a second woman into the same house without ever mentioning that the last one died in it. And the man who killed her lived 10 miles away. She closed the door, replaced the key, went downstairs, finished kneading the bread she had started that morning. Because bread still needed making and cattle still needed feeding, and the world did not stop turning just because you discovered you were living in a dead woman's house. But her hands, those capable, calloused, steady hands, shook the whole time. Caleb knew his wife had found the room by the way she looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, with patience. The patience of a woman waiting for something to break who had already decided she was not going to run when it did. She did not confront him. That was worse. If she had screamed or cried or thrown the half-finished letter in his face, he could have met it with explanation, with defense, with the armor he had built around himself over 7 years of living with this particular lie. Instead, she pulled back. The small intimacies they had been building, the brush of fingers when she passed him coffee, the way she sat close by the fire in the evenings, the slight softening around her eyes when she looked at him, all of it vanished, replaced by a careful distance, a professional courtesy that was somehow more devastating than any accusation. Caleb, who had lived alone for 7 years and thought he understood loneliness, discovered that sleeping next to a woman who was choosing silence was a different kind of alone entirely. He responded the way he always did, with control. He told Hannah she was not to ride beyond the ranch boundaries without an escort. His reason was spring bears coming out of hibernation. His real reason was the absolute terror that she would ride to town, find Ruthie or someone else who might tell her what he had been unable to say, and learn the truth from a stranger instead of from him. Hannah took the order for exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, she looked at him across the breakfast table with something in her eyes that he recognized because he had seen it in Margaret's eyes once. The day she told him she was going to write that letter to the territorial marshal, whether he approved or not. "You married me because I was strong," Hannah said. Her voice was level, but there was iron underneath. "And now you are caging me because you are afraid of what I will find." She paused. "You sound more like my father every day, Caleb Mercer." The words hit him like a branding iron pressed to bare skin. He physically flinched. Without a word, he pushed back from the table, walked to the barn, saddled his horse, and rode out to the far pasture. He did not speak to her for 2 days. On the 2nd day, Hannah went to Coop. She found him in the barn, repairing a broken bridle. She laid the half-finished letter on the workbench between them and stood with her hands at her sides, not threatening, not pleading, just steady. The way a woman stands when she has decided she will not leave without what she came for. Margaret did not leave, did she? It was not a question. Coop looked at the letter for a long time. His hands, those scarred and steady hands that had worked this ranch for 15 years, went completely still. "No, ma'am. She did not leave." He told her everything. 7 years ago, Caleb had ridden to Helena to buy cattle. A 3-day trip. While he was gone, 4 men raided the ranch. Margaret was alone in the house. The hands were out on the far property checking fence lines. Nobody heard the shots until it was too late. She fought. Coop's voice was quiet, controlled, but Hannah could hear the old grief underneath. There were signs of struggle, a broken window. A rifle fired once, but 4 against 1. They shot her in the kitchen. She was still alive when I found her, barely. I got her to bed, did what I could. Sent a rider after Caleb. He came back in half the time the trip should have taken. Rode that horse near to death. When he got here, Margaret was still breathing, just barely. He sat beside her for 3 days, talked to her the whole time, even when she could not hear anymore. When she passed, he dug the grave himself. Would not let anyone help. Took him 6 hours in frozen ground. Hannah stood very still, absorbing this the way dry earth absorbs rain. Deep and thorough, changing the composition of everything it touches. "And after?" she asked. Coop's jaw tightened. "After the burial, he rode to Crane's ranch. I tried to stop him. He threw me off his horse like I weighed nothing. By the time I caught up, Crane was on the ground with his face caved in and Caleb was still hitting him. I had to knock Caleb unconscious to stop him. Crane survived, barely, and the son of a gun used it. Filed assault charges with a territorial judge he had in his pocket. Cost Caleb 3 years of ranch profits in damages and legal fees. That is why the ranch runs tight even though the land is rich. Caleb has been paying for the one time he lost control." Hannah closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Why did he lie? About Margaret leaving? Because if the world knew Margaret was murdered, Caleb would have had to name Crane publicly. And if he named Crane, he would have tried to kill him again. For real this time. And I would have watched him hang. And everything he built, everything Margaret died for, would have gone to Crane at auction. Coop met her gaze. So Caleb buried the truth with his wife. And I helped him. He paused. But you are here now, Mrs. Mercer. And you deserve to know who you are living with and what you are standing in the middle of. That same afternoon, a letter arrived from Virginia. Hannah opened it, expecting news from Lydia about Gerald's latest disasters. Instead, she found a confession that knocked the ground out from under her. Lydia's handwriting was shaky, as if her hand had trembled the entire time she was writing. Dearest Hannah, I have carried this since before your wedding, and the weight of it is destroying me. Before Mr. Mercer arrived, I found letters in Father's study, correspondence with a man named Silas Crane. Father had been selling information about the Mercer Ranch for months. Land surveys, water maps, financial records, anything Crane would pay for. The payments were keeping Father in whiskey and paying his worst debts. I should have told you, before the wedding, before you agreed to go, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew, you would refuse to marry Mr. Mercer and we would both starve. So I kept silent. I told myself I was protecting you, but I was protecting myself. I was a coward, Hannah. I am sorry. I am so terribly sorry. Hannah read the letter twice. Her hands were steady. Her face was blank. But inside, something was crumbling. Her father had sold her safety for whiskey money. Her sister, her beloved sister, her only true ally in the world, had known about the danger and hidden it, had let Hannah walk blindfolded into the crosshairs of a man who had already killed one wife on this ranch. Everyone in her life had traded pieces of her to save themselves. For one terrible moment, standing in the kitchen with Lydia's letter in one hand and Margaret's unfinished accusation burned into her memory, Hannah wondered if Caleb was any different. Had he chosen her because he saw her value, or because he needed a warm body in a dead woman's house to win a legal claim? She did not cry. She did not scream. She folded both letters carefully, put them in her apron pocket, and went to find her husband. He was in the barn, repairing a saddle. His hands moved with the muscle memory of a man who had done this work 10,000 times. He looked up when she entered, and she saw in his eyes that he already knew something had changed. Hannah placed Margaret's letter on the workbench, then Lydia's letter beside it. Your wife was murdered by Silas Crane, she said. My father sold your secrets to the man who killed her. My sister knew and did not tell me before our wedding, and you brought me here without mentioning any of it. She paused. Is there anything else? Any other truth I am living inside that I do not know about? Caleb set down his tools. For the first time since she had known him, Hannah saw tears in those winter-pale eyes. Not falling, just there, present, undeniable. Margaret did not just die, Hannah. She died because of me. I left her alone. I knew Crane was dangerous, and I still left her alone to go buy cattle I could have bought the next month. She died in our kitchen, writing a letter to save this ranch, and I was not there to protect her. His voice dropped. And afterward, I went to Crane's ranch and I beat him until his face did not look like a face anymore. Coop had to knock me unconscious to make me stop. That is who I am, Hannah. That is what lives inside me, a man who failed the woman he loved and then became the kind of animal he spent his whole life trying not to be. I did not tell you because I was ashamed, not just of Margaret dying, of what I did after, of what I wanted to do, of what I still want to do every single time I see Crane's fence line from the high pasture. Hannah absorbed this, all of it. The grief and the violence and the shame and the lie that had grown around it all like scar tissue around a wound. Then she spoke, and her voice had an edge to it like broken glass. You lied to protect yourself. Not me. Yes. And my sister kept silent to protect herself. Not me. Caleb was quiet for a moment. I cannot speak for your sister. You do not need to. I am seeing the pattern. Hannah's eyes burned, but no tears fell. Everyone in my life decides what I can handle. Everyone decides what truth I deserve. And I am done with it, Caleb. I am done being protected into ignorance. What do you want from me? Everything. Every secret. Every ugly truth. Every fear you have been carrying alone. I did not come 2,000 miles to live in another house full of lies. The silence between them was enormous. Bigger than the Montana sky outside the barn doors. Bigger than 7 years of grief and guilt. Bigger than the distance between two people who had chosen each other for practical reasons and were now standing on the edge of something far more dangerous. Then Caleb Mercer did the hardest thing he had done since digging his first wife's grave in frozen ground. He told Hannah everything. That night she slept in one of the spare bedrooms, not as punishment, as necessity. She needed space to think, to grieve, to decide whether the partnership she had been promised was real or just another version of the transaction her father had brokered. And in the master bedroom, Caleb Mercer lay awake in a bed that felt larger than the whole Montana sky, staring at the ceiling, understanding for the first time that keeping Hannah safe and keeping Hannah close might require entirely different things, and that he might have to choose. Silas Crane rode up to the Mercer ranch on a Sunday morning. He came smiling, the way a rattlesnake comes sunning itself on a warm rock. Nothing in his appearance suggested danger. That was what made him terrifying. Hannah saw him from the kitchen window, a man in his 50s on a fine horse, dressed better than any working rancher had a right to be. Polished boots, clean coat, a hat that had never seen real weather. He rode with the ease of a man who spent more time giving orders than doing work, and he carried a bottle of good whiskey in one hand like a calling card. She dried her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch just as Caleb came around the side of the house, his hand already resting on the revolver at his hip. The change in Caleb was immediate and total. Every muscle in his body went tight. His face became something carved from granite. And his eyes, those winter sky eyes, went flat and dead in a way Hannah had never seen. Crane. The word came out of Caleb like the click of a gun being cocked. Mercer. Crane's smile was wide and warm and meant absolutely nothing. Just being neighborly. Heard you brought home a bride. Thought I would come by and pay my respects. He dismounted with easy grace, climbed the porch steps, and turned that warm, empty smile on Hannah. Mrs. Mercer, what a pleasure. Caleb here has been needing a woman's touch around this place. The last one did not quite take to frontier life as I understand it. Hannah felt Caleb go rigid beside her. She could feel the violence coming off him like heat from a stove. Waves of it, barely contained, straining against the leash he kept it on. And in that moment, Hannah made a decision that would change the course of everything that followed. She became invisible. Not the way she had been invisible in her father's house, out of shame or survival. This time, she chose it, deliberately, strategically. She dropped her eyes, softened her posture, folded her hands in front of her apron the way Lydia used to fold hers. She became exactly the kind of woman a man like Silas Crane would dismiss without a second thought. Small, meek, decorative at best, invisible at worst. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Crane," she said in a voice 2 shades softer than her real one. "Can I bring you some tea?" Crane glanced at her the way you glance at wallpaper. Noted and immediately forgotten. "That would be fine, Mrs. Mercer, very kind." He turned back to Caleb, and Hannah retreated to the kitchen to boil water and listen through the open window to every word. Crane's pitch was smooth and practiced. He wanted to buy the water rights that ran through Mercer land. A generous price, he said. Reasonable for both parties. They were neighbors, after all. They ought to cooperate. Caleb's response was barely controlled. "Last time we cooperated, I lost more than water." The temperature on the porch dropped 20 degrees. Crane's smile did not flicker. He finished his tea, made his goodbyes, rode away with the easy confidence of a man who believed time was on his side. The moment Crane's horse cleared the gate, Hannah dropped the meek act like a snake shedding its skin. "He killed Margaret," she said, stepping back onto the porch. "He sent those men on the road, and now he is sitting on our porch drinking tea and asking to buy our water. What are we going to do about it?" Caleb turned to look at her. Something shifted in his expression. She had said we, not you. We. For the first time since the truth came out, since the locked room and the letters and the 2 nights she had spent in the spare bedroom, Hannah Mercer was not standing apart from her husband. She was standing beside him. He told her everything about Crane, the full history, former business partners, the falling out over water rights, the raid, Margaret's letter, the beating, the lawsuit, the corrupt county sheriff who owed Crane favors going back 15 years. "You have no legal evidence," Hannah said when he finished. "Nothing that would hold up in court." "No. Margaret's letter is unfinished. It accuses but does not prove. It is a start." Hannah's mind was already working, turning the pieces over the way she had once turned soil on her father's failing fields, looking for what could be made to grow. "My father sold information to Crane. That means there is a paper trail, letters, payments, documents that connect Crane to my father and my father to your ranch secrets. If we find that trail, we have a pattern. Pattern plus Margaret's letter plus living witnesses might be enough." Caleb stared at her. "You have been thinking about this." "I have been thinking about this since I found that room." This was the moment their partnership became real. Not through a wedding ceremony, not through shared work in the barn, through shared strategy against a common enemy. 2 minds working the same problem from different angles and finding that together they could see things neither could see alone. That week, Hannah discovered something else. She was in the kitchen after dark, cleaning up from supper, when she heard the bunkhouse door creak open. She looked through the window and saw Thomas Young slip out into the darkness, moving with the careful silence of someone who did not want to be seen. Hannah knew that walk. She had perfected it herself, moving through her father's house at night, avoiding the floorboards that creaked, making herself a ghost when she needed to find out what Gerald was hiding. She followed Thomas, carefully, silently, using skills honed over 22 years of reading dangerous situations and navigating them without being caught. Thomas walked to the northern boundary of the property. In the shadow of the old fence line, a man on horseback waited. They spoke in low voices. Papers changed hands. Then the man rode away, and Thomas walked back toward the bunkhouse, his shoulders hunched with the particular weight of guilt. Hannah stepped out of the shadows. Thomas nearly jumped out of his skin. She did not raise her voice, did not threaten, just looked at him with the steady, knowing gaze of a woman who had spent her life surrounded by men making bad decisions. "How long?" she asked. Thomas's face crumpled. 3 months. "Since before you got here. Crane knows about my gambling debts. Says he will tell my pa back in Nebraska if I do not cooperate. My pa would disown me, Mrs. Mercer. He is all I have got." Hannah looked at this scared boy and saw, with painful clarity, a version of herself. Someone trapped by the leverage others held over them. Someone doing wrong things for understandable reasons. "Here is what is going to happen," she said. "You are going to keep meeting Crane's man. But from now on, you will give him what I tell you to give him. Wrong numbers, false schedules, misleading information. You will be working for us." Thomas stared at her. "You are not going to tell the boss?" And here was where Hannah made her mistake. The mistake that would cost her, that would prove she was human, and flawed and capable of the exact same sin she had condemned in Caleb and Lydia. "Not yet," she said. "I will handle this." She told herself it was because she needed to move fast, because she could handle it alone. Because she did not want to burden Caleb with another crisis while he was still raw from having his secrets exposed. The real reason was simpler and uglier. She did not trust anyone enough to share control. She had been the one carrying everything for so long that the idea of putting the weight down, of letting someone else help bear it, felt not like relief, but like surrender. She was doing the exact thing she had condemned Caleb for, making unilateral decisions for someone else's protection without their knowledge or consent. And she did not see the irony. Not yet. Over the following weeks, something tentative and fragile began to rebuild between Hannah and Caleb. They ate supper together again, talked by the fire in the evenings. He shared the ranch ledgers with her, all of them, including the pages showing the lawsuit damages that had bled his accounts for years. She shared her plans for the household, her ideas for the garden come spring, her thoughts on supply management. One night, she said quietly, "I am sorry I compared you to my father. That was the cruelest thing I could have said, and it was not fair." Caleb was quiet for a moment. "It was not entirely unfair either. I was trying to control you. I told myself it was protection, but protection that comes with a cage is just another word for ownership." He paused. "My father raised cattle his whole life, and he always said the same thing. A penned animal is not safe. It is just trapped. I was penning you, Hannah, and I am sorry for it." She moved to sit beside him, not touching, but close. "I need you to promise me something," she said. "Name it. No more decisions about my safety without my consent. I am your partner, not your ward. Agreed." He looked at her. "Same goes for you." The words hit Hannah like a stone in still water. She felt the ripple of them spread through her, touching the secret she carried about Thomas, about the false information she was feeding to Crane, about the plans she was building alone in the dark. She should have told him right then. She knew it. The way you know a storm is coming by the pressure in the air. But she pushed it down. Told herself she would tell him soon. Just not yet. Just a little more time. She lay awake that night listening to Caleb's breathing. Even and deep. No nightmares for the first time in weeks. She had asked him to stop keeping secrets. He had agreed. He had asked the same of her. She had agreed. And hidden in her recipe box between instructions for sourdough bread and preserved tomatoes was a list of false information she was feeding to Silas Crane through a terrified 19-year-old boy. A secret she was keeping from her husband for exactly the same reason he had kept his secrets from her. Because she believed she knew better. The irony tasted like copper, like blood from a split lip, like every lie she had ever been told by people who said they loved her. The fire started on the East Ridge at 3 in the morning. Caleb was out of bed before the orange glow registered fully in his mind. He knew this was not lightning. There had been no storm. He knew this was not a campfire gone wild. Nobody camped that close to his boundary line. This was Silas Crane, writing his name across the sky in smoke and flame. He pulled on his boots and was out the door before Hannah had finished dressing. She heard him shouting orders in the yard, his voice cutting through the darkness with the precision of a man who had been preparing for crisis his entire adult life. By the time she reached the porch, the east horizon was a wall of orange and red. The wind, that relentless Montana wind that never stopped and never slowed, was pushing the fire straight toward the cattle pens in the east barn. Every hand was already moving. Coop had the men organized before Caleb finished giving orders. Sam and 2 others ran for the well to start hauling water. Miguel and his brother Carlos rode out to drive the cattle west, away from the fire line. Thomas, his broken ankle mostly healed from the heifer kick weeks ago, was digging a fire break with a shovel in each hand and terror on his face. Hannah saddled Liberty, the mare she had claimed as her own during her first weeks at the ranch, and rode toward the cattle before anyone could tell her not to. The smoke hit her like a physical wall, black and thick and suffocating. The heat came next, blistering even at 200 yards, turning the air into something you could chew. She found the herd in chaos. 200 head of cattle, panicked eyes rolling white, stampeding in every direction. Miguel and Carlos were trying to turn them west, but the fire was moving too fast, pushing the animals toward the creek bed where they would pile up and crush each other. Hannah rode into the thick of it. She screamed and whistled and swung her rope, turning animals one at a time, then 2, then a dozen, the way a single stone can redirect a river if it is placed in exactly the right spot. Liberty ran like she was born for this, cutting and weaving through the herd with instincts that no training could produce. They lost 30 head, 30 animals that did not turn in time, that ran into the fire instead of away from it, that died screaming in a way that Hannah would hear in her sleep for months. but they saved the rest. She was riding the fire line, checking for stragglers, when she saw Thomas through the smoke. He was on foot. His horse had thrown him when a burning branch fell across the trail. He was limping on his bad ankle, stumbling through the smoke, and the fire was coming up behind him like a living thing, a wall of heat and flame eating the grass faster than a man could run. Hannah did not think. She turned Liberty around and rode back into the fire line. The heat hit her like opening an oven door. Embers landed on her arms and burned through her sleeves. Liberty screamed but did not stop because Hannah's hands on the reins were steady and sure, and the mare trusted her rider more than she feared the fire. Hannah reached Thomas, grabbed his arm, hauled him across the saddle behind her, with strength she did not know she had, and kicked Liberty into a dead gallop. They cleared the fire line with seconds to spare. Behind them, the ground where Thomas had been standing erupted into flame. They rode into the yard, both of them coughing and burned and alive. Thomas slid off the horse and lay in the dirt, gasping. Hannah dismounted on shaking legs, her face black with soot, her eyebrows singed, her hands blistered. Caleb was standing by the well. He had seen everything. The ride into the smoke, the rescue, the gallop out of the fire with a man across her saddle and hell at her back. The look on his face was something Hannah would carry with her for the rest of her life. Not fear, though there was fear in it. Not pride, though there was that too. It was the look of a man watching something he had been afraid to believe in become undeniably, impossibly real. By dawn, the fire was dying. Rain came, not the gentle spring drizzle Hannah had been hoping for, but a hard, mean Montana downpour that turned the burned ground into a black mudscape of ash and water. Sam found the evidence at the ignition point. Oil-soaked rags. 3 of them placed in a line along the eastern fence where the grass was driest. Professional work, deliberate. Nobody said Crane's name. They did not need to. Caleb stood in the rain, looking at the destroyed east barn, the blackened acres, the carcasses of 30 dead cattle. His hands were clenched at his sides. The tendons in his neck stood out like cables. Hannah knew what he was thinking. She could read it in every line of his body. He was going to saddle his horse and ride to Crane's ranch, and this time Coop would not be able to stop him. She stepped in front of him, put herself between Caleb and the horse. If you go there tonight, you will kill him. Then you will hang. Then Crane wins, dead and still victorious. Margaret dies twice. Is that what you want? Caleb looked at her with eyes that were not winter pale anymore. They were furnace hot, burning with 7 years of caged fury. Then what? What do you want me to do, Hannah? Sit here and watch him burn everything I have built? I want you to trust me. I have a plan. What plan? And here it all came apart. In the rush of the moment, in the urgency of stopping Caleb from doing something that would destroy him, Hannah told him about Thomas, about the double agent operation she had been running for weeks, about the false information she had been feeding to Crane's contact, about the strategy she had been building alone in secret, without telling the man she had promised to partner with. The silence that followed was worse than the fire. Caleb went very still. The rage did not disappear. It changed direction. You have been handling this alone, behind my back, feeding information to Crane through Thomas without telling me. I was going to... When? After it worked? So you could present it as a victory instead of a risk you took with my ranch, my hands, and our lives? Caleb, you did the exact thing you made me swear I would never do again. You decided what I could handle. You made choices about my safety without my consent. You looked me in the eye and asked for honesty and then lied by omission every single day. Hannah had no defense, because he was right, every word. She had done exactly what she had condemned him for, and the worst part was not his anger but her own recognition of why. Because trusting someone else with the weight was harder than carrying it alone. Because she had been the one holding everything together for 22 years. And letting go of that control felt not like freedom, but like falling. You are right, she said quietly. I am sorry. I was wrong. Sorry does not undo the risk you took. No, it does not. But I am telling you now, everything. And I am asking you to work with me instead of shutting me out. Can you do that? The silence stretched. The rain fell. The smoldering fire hissed and steamed in the distance. Tell me the plan, Caleb said finally. All of it. And then we decide together. That is what partnership means, Hannah. Together. Not you carrying the world alone and calling it strength. Hannah Mercer, who had spent her entire life being strong by herself, learned something in that moment that was harder than any winter she had survived, harder than any fire she had ridden through. She learned that the opposite of weakness was not independence. It was trust. She told him everything. They planned together, standing in the rain beside the ruins of the East Barn, drawing diagrams in the mud with sticks, arguing and adjusting and refining until they had something that might work. Used Thomas to feed Crane one final piece of bait. Caleb was financially ruined by the fire, desperate, ready to sell the water rights at a fraction of their value. Crane would not be able to resist. Invite Crane to the ranch to sign the deal. Set the stage with witnesses who had reason to be there. Sarah and Jack Morrison for a social visit. The minister making pastoral rounds. Ruthie bringing supplies from town. All perfectly natural. Nothing to spook a careful man. Then let Hannah do what she did best. Be invisible. Be underestimated. Be the woman nobody was watching while she took apart the most dangerous man in the territory using nothing but truth and patience and a pair of capable hands that had been dismissed her entire life. Caleb hated the plan. Not because it was bad strategy, because it put Hannah in the same room as the man who had murdered his first wife. Margaret was alone when they came for her, Hannah said. I will not be. You will be right there. Coop, Sam, everyone. But Crane needs to see a weak woman, and I have spent my whole life being underestimated. Let me use it. 2 days after the fire, a wagon arrived from town carrying the last person Hannah expected to see. Lydia Whitmore stepped down from the wagon seat, thinner than Hannah remembered, travel-worn and windburned and wearing a dress that would have horrified her 3 months ago. She looked at her sister across the muddy yard, and Hannah saw something in her face that was new. Not the polished confidence Lydia had worn like armor in Virginia. Something raw, something real. Father is dead, Lydia said. Stroke. 2 weeks ago. Uncle William in Richmond tried to marry me off to a banker, twice my age. So I left. She paused, took a breath. I have nowhere else to go. And I have something to tell you in person, not in a letter. About Father and Crane. About what I knew and when I knew it. The sisters looked at each other across the distance of secrets and silence and 1,000 miles of hard road. I know what you did, Hannah said. I got your letter. Then you know I am sorry. I know you are sorry. I do not know yet if I forgive you. Not warm, not cold, just honest. And for 2 women raised in a house of lies, honest was a place to start. Hannah put on the blue wedding dress, the only fine thing she owned. She slipped the 2-shot Derringer into her apron pocket. The small gun felt heavier than its weight. Ruthie had brought it on her last visit, pressed it into Hannah's hands with tears in her sharp old eyes. This was Margaret's, Ruthie said. She bought it the week she arrived in Montana, said she would never fire it. She was wrong about some things, but she was right to buy this. Hannah checked the loads. Both chambers. Ready. Today, she would play the obedient wife one last time. And if everything went according to plan, today was the day the girl nobody wanted would bring down the man they all feared. The morning was organized chaos disguised as ordinary life. Thomas had delivered the bait 3 days ago. The story was simple and believable. Caleb Mercer was broke after the fire, desperate, ready to sell the water rights at half their value just to keep the ranch from going under. Crane had taken the bait like a trout takes a fly, fast and hungry and confident. By 9 in the morning, every piece was in position. Sarah and Jack Morrison arrived for what appeared to be a casual social visit. Sarah brought bread and preserves. Jack shook Caleb's hand, and they talked about fence repair and spring grazing, like 2 men with nothing more pressing on their minds. The minister came by on what he called his regular pastoral rounds. He sat in the parlor with a cup of coffee and the particular patience of a man of God who has been asked to witness something important. Ruthie brought supplies from town in a wagon loaded with flour and sugar, and the kind of everyday goods that gave her presence perfect cover. Coop positioned the hands around the property, not visible from the house, not obvious, but there, armed and ready, in the barn and behind the wood pile and along the fence line where they could reach the porch in 30 seconds if needed. Lydia's role was the piece Hannah had not planned until her sister arrived. But now, looking at Lydia in a borrowed dress with determination in her eyes, Hannah realized that the skills their father had drilled into her older sister were not the weakness she had always assumed. They were weapons, just a different kind. Crane has never met you, Hannah told Lydia. You are going to be the charming, vapid sister-in-law visiting from Virginia. You are going to keep him comfortable, make conversation, read the room. And if things go wrong, you are going to get the women out of the room. Lydia straightened. Something fierce came alive in her expression. You want me to use the skills Father raised me for, the charm, the ability to make a man feel important while showing him nothing real. Yes, exactly that. Then I am finally good for something that matters. Hannah looked at her sister. You were always good for something that mattered, Lydia. The world was just asking the wrong questions. Before Crane arrived, Caleb found Hannah alone in the kitchen. He checked his revolver. His hands were steady, but his eyes were dark with things he could not say. If he touches you, Caleb started, he will not get the chance. But if he does, I have my own insurance. She showed him the Derringer. Where did you get that? Ruthie. It was Margaret's. Caleb went still. He looked at the small gun in his wife's hand, and Hannah watched 7 years of grief move across his face like weather across the plains. Margaret bought that the week we arrived in Montana, he said quietly. Said she would never fire it. She was wrong about a lot of things, but she was right to buy it. He put his hands on either side of Hannah's face, those scarred hands that had built and broken and learned finally to be gentle. Come back to me, he said. Whatever happens in that room, you come back to me. I am not going anywhere, Caleb. That is the whole point. Silas Crane arrived at noon. He came with his lawyer, a thin, nervous man named Howell, who handled what Crane called his legal arrangements. Crane was dressed like he was attending a governor's ball. Polished boots, fine coat, a hat that probably cost more than Thomas made in a month. He saw Lydia first and turned on the charm like a man who had been turning it on and off his entire life. Lydia sparkled back with exactly the right degree of warmth and emptiness, complimenting his horse, asking about his ranch, performing the role she had been trained for since childhood. She was magnificent. Crane dismissed her as decoration within 30 seconds, exactly as planned. Hannah served tea. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, her movements small and subservient. She was the meek, overwhelmed frontier wife, the kind of woman a man like Silas Crane had built his entire worldview on dismissing. They sat down to business. Crane spread the contract on the table with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. Caleb played his part, the reluctant seller, beaten down by circumstance, gritting his teeth as he pretended to review terms he had already memorized. Hannah poured more tea, and accidentally, clumsily spilled it across the contract. "Oh, I am so sorry," she said, dabbing frantically at the wet paper. "How clumsy of me! Let me just—" She soaked up the tea, and while she was at it, she read every line of fine print on that document. What she found was exactly what she expected. Hidden among the standard water rights language were clauses granting Crane unrestricted access across the entirety of Mercer land, not just the water, the land itself. An access easement that would allow Crane's men to cross the property at will, day or night, for any purpose. The same kind of access they would have needed 7 years ago to reach the ranch house without being seen. Hannah straightened up. She set the cloth down. And when she looked at Silas Crane, the meek wife was gone. In her place stood the woman who had birthed calves at midnight and shot wolves in the dark and ridden through fire to save a man's life. Mr. Crane, she said, her voice clear and steady as a church bell. This contract includes an unrestricted access easement across the entirety of Mercer Land. That is not a water rights agreement. That is an occupation clause. Crane's smile flickered. Mrs. Mercer, the legal details are best left to... To whom? Your lawyer? The same lawyer who drafted a suspiciously similar easement for my father's property in Virginia 3 years ago? The one that gave you unrestricted access to land that bordered the Mercer Ranch's northern water supply? Dead silence. Crane's lawyer went the color of old milk. Crane's mask cracked. Just a fraction. But Hannah saw it. I do not know what you are implying, he said. I am not implying anything, Mr. Crane. I am stating facts. You purchased access to my father's land. You used that access to map Mercer water sources. You used that information to contaminate upstream flow. Margaret Mercer documented 3 instances before she was killed. She placed Margaret's unfinished letter on the table. Crane stared at it. His face changed. The polish stripped away like paint in a fire, revealing the raw and ugly structure underneath. That letter proves nothing, he said. The ramblings of a hysterical woman who... Caleb's chair scraped back. His hand moved to his hip. Coop, positioned at the doorway, shifted his weight forward. Lydia spoke before Crane could recover. Her voice was bright and conversational and absolutely deadly. Oh, Mr. Crane, I nearly forgot. I brought some of Father's correspondence from Virginia. He was such a collector, kept every letter he ever received, including, I believe, several from you. She produced a bundle of letters tied with ribbon from her bag and laid them on the table beside Margaret's letter, with payment records. Crane's composure shattered like glass hitting stone. I paid your father for legitimate land assessments, he said, and his voice was rising, losing the smooth polish, the careful control. You paid my father for intelligence about a neighboring rancher's operations, Hannah said. The same rancher, whose wife was murdered shortly after she discovered your criminal activity. The same rancher whose property was set on fire last week with oil-soaked rags. The same kind of rags your lawyer's office purchases by the barrel for lamp fuel, according to the general store ledger. Which I checked. Crane stood so fast his chair hit the floor behind him. 7 years of patience. 7 years of careful maneuvering and plausible deniability, and the slow, calculated destruction of the man who stood between him and the water he believed was rightfully his, all of it burned away in a moment of pure rage. I have waited 7 years for this land, he shouted. 7 years watching Mercer sit on water that should be mine, water I have got more right to than any dirt-handed squatter who... He caught himself. His mouth snapped shut. But it was too late. The words were out, and the room was full of people who had heard every one. The minister, Sarah, and Jack Morrison. Ruthie Dawson, who was crying silently, tears running down her weathered cheeks, grieving for Margaret, her friend, who after 7 years in an unmarked grave was finally being spoken for. Something snapped behind Crane's eyes. The calculation came back, cold and fast, but twisted now with desperation. He reached into his coat and came out with a knife. Not a working man's tool, but a weapon, long and sharp and held with the grip of someone who had used one before. He lunged at Hannah. Caleb moved faster than thought. He put his body between the blade and his wife the way he had not been able to do 7 years ago, the way he had been punishing himself every day since for failing to do. The knife caught his forearm. A long, shallow cut that opened like a red mouth and bled freely over the table, over Margaret's letter, over the contract that was supposed to steal everything Caleb had built. Sam and Coop hit Crane from both sides. They drove him to the floor with the efficient violence of men who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Coop's knee went into Crane's back. Sam twisted the knife away with one hand while pinning Crane's wrist with the other. The lawyer made for the door. Jack Morrison caught him on the porch, one big rancher's hand on the smaller man's collar. From the floor, with his face pressed against the boards of a house he had tried to destroy, Silas Crane screamed the words that sealed his fate. I should have finished the job 7 years ago. Should have killed Mercer too instead of just his woman. Confession. Before 5 witnesses, a minister and 2 respected ranchers, and the woman who had been Margaret Mercer's only friend in Montana, and the wife who had engineered the entire thing while everyone was watching and nobody was seeing. Jack Morrison rode for the county sheriff. Sarah Morrison simultaneously dispatched a messenger to the territorial marshal in Helena because Crane's connections with local law made the county man unreliable. Crane was locked in the root cellar under armed guard, cursing and threatening, and promising retribution that everyone in the room knew he would never be in a position to deliver. Hannah bandaged Caleb's arm at the kitchen table. Her hands trembled. For the first time in the entire story, from the first slap in her father's parlor to the fire line to this moment, her hands actually shook. Not from fear. From the delayed understanding that the knife had been aimed at her chest, and Caleb had put his body in its path without hesitation. The same way she understood now. He had failed to do for Margaret. The same choice, made right this time. Not because he was different, but because he was given a second chance and chose differently. "Your plan almost got me killed," Caleb said. "Your plan just saved your ranch," Hannah replied. He looked at her. Blood soaking through the bandage, eyes full of something that was not pain. "Our ranch," he said. She tied off the bandage, looked up, met his eyes. And for the first time in months, they both smiled. Not bright or easy or without shadows, but real and earned. The way everything worth having on the frontier was earned, through work and risk and the willingness to stand your ground when the fire came. That evening, with Crane locked away and the hands standing guard and Lydia making coffee in the kitchen like she had lived there her whole life, Hannah Mercer sat on the front porch and listened to Montana. Not the silence she had feared when she first arrived, but the wind in the grass and the cattle settling and the creak of a house that was still standing, still hers. Margaret Mercer had started this fight 7 years ago, alone in a kitchen with a letter and a 2-shot Derringer. Hannah Mercer had finished it. Not alone, never alone again. Spring came to Montana like a debt finally paid, slow, grudging, and all the more beautiful for having been earned. The snow retreated up the mountains. The grass came back, even on the burned eastern acres, green shoots pushing through black earth like stubborn proof that destruction was not the same as ending. Silas Crane stood trial in the territorial court at Helena, not the county court where his pet sheriff held sway, but the territorial bench where judges answered to a higher authority and could not be bought with good whiskey and old favors. The evidence was damning. Margaret's letter, Gerald Whitmore's correspondence proving months of paid intelligence gathering, the arson evidence from the fire, the testimony of 5 unimpeachable witnesses to Crane's confession, the knife wound on Caleb's arm still healing. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts, orchestrating the murder of Margaret Ann Mercer, arson of Mercer Ranch property, assault with a deadly weapon, a sentence of 25 years in the territorial prison at Deer Lodge, where the walls were stone and the winters were long, and no amount of money or connections could buy your way out. The day the verdict came by telegraph, Caleb saddled his horse and rode to the high pasture alone. Hannah found him there at sunset, sitting on a rock overlooking the land that stretched to every horizon. She tied Liberty to a scrub pine and sat down beside him, close enough to touch, not touching, letting him decide. After a long time, he spoke. "It does not bring her back. No, it does not. But it means she did not die for nothing." He took her hand. They sat together and watched the sun go down behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and the deep, bruised purple that comes just before dark. In the weeks that followed, the ranch settled into something new, not the tense, haunted quiet of before, but a steadier rhythm. A rhythm that had room for grief and healing and the slow, patient work of building something that would last. Gerald Whitmore was dead. The news had come with Lydia, confirmed later by letter from the attorney handling the estate. He had gone in his sleep. A stroke, quick and relatively painless, which was more mercy than he had shown to either of his daughters in the years since their mother's death. Hannah grieved. not for the man who hit her and used her and sold her safety for whiskey money. She grieved for the man he had been before all that, the father who taught her to read because he had no son, and believed his daughters deserved to know their letters, the man who once carried her on his shoulders through the Virginia fields, and told her she could be anything she set her mind to. That man had died years before his body caught up. Perhaps that is what grief really is, Lydia said one evening as the sisters sat together on the porch, mourning the distance between what was and what could have been. Lydia stayed through spring. The sisters rebuilt their bond slowly, not back to what it had been, which was built on inequality and unspoken rules, but forward into something new, something based on honesty, even when it hurt. Lydia used her social graces to help Hannah navigate the ranching community. She organized a collection for families affected by the fire. She wrote letters to territorial officials about water rights protections with the kind of eloquent persuasion that came naturally to her, and that Hannah could never have managed. And one evening in late May, sitting by the fire with a cup of tea, Lydia told Hannah her plans. "I am going to Helena," she said. "There's a woman there who runs a school for young ladies. She is looking for a teacher of etiquette and social graces and correspondence. She said my skills would be valuable." "They are valuable," Hannah said without hesitation. "They always were." Lydia smiled. Something small and real that had none of the performance she had worn like armor in Virginia. "I used to think you were the strong one and I was the decorative one. But you taught me something, Hannah. We are both strong. We were just fighting different battles," the sisters embraced. The ship's trial. Real forgiveness. Not the easy kind that comes from pretending nothing happened. The hard kind that comes from looking at exactly what happened and choosing to love each other anyway. Thomas Young was still at the ranch. His broken ankle had healed. His gambling debts were paid, covered by Caleb in what he called an advance on the next 5 years of wages, which was Caleb's way of saying he believed in second chances without having to use those particular words. Thomas had become one of the hardest working hands on the place. Quiet now, where he had once been eager. Steady, where he had once been reckless. Carrying the particular gravity of a young man who had learned exactly how much a bad decision could cost and had been given the rare gift of surviving the lesson. "Everyone deserves one chance to be foolish," Caleb told Hannah. "What matters is what they do with the second chance." Coop was still Coop, quiet and competent and steady as the mountains on the horizon. But he called Hannah by her first name now instead of ma'am, and the shift was small, but its significance was everything. Sam still chewed tobacco and played his fiddle on Saturday nights and called Hannah Doc with a gruff affection that was worth more than any flowery compliment. When a new hand hired for the summer drive made a dismissive comment about taking orders from a woman, Sam set him straight with 4 words. "She has earned it, son." Ruthie came to the ranch one afternoon in June with a box she had been keeping for 7 years. Margaret's things, letters, a small portrait painted by an itinerant artist the year they arrived in Montana. A pressed wildflower from Margaret's first Montana spring still holding a ghost of color between the pages of a Bible. "She would want you to have these," Ruthie said. "Not because you are her replacement, because you are her continuation. She started something here. You finished it." Hannah held the portrait carefully. Margaret Mercer looked out at her with intelligent eyes and a slight smile, and the particular posture of a woman who was bracing for the next blow but refusing to flinch from it. "I understand," Hannah whispered to the portrait. "I understand why he loved you. And I understand why you wrote that letter even though you knew it was dangerous. Because some things are worth fighting for, even alone." She paused. "But I learned something you did not get the chance to. You do not have to fight alone. That is the part that changes everything. Morning, early summer. The kind of Montana morning that makes you understand why people cross a continent to live in a place that is trying to kill them half the year. The sky so blue it hurts. The air so clean it tastes like water from a spring. Mountains standing purple and white in the distance like sentinels guarding the edge of the world." Hannah Mercer walked across the yard toward the oak tree behind the house. She carried wildflowers, lupine and Indian paintbrush and the small white blossoms that grew wild in the meadow below the south pasture. She had picked them that morning before dawn, while the dew was still heavy and the ranch was quiet. The headstone under the oak tree was new. Caleb had carved it himself over the winter months, working by lantern light in the barn on evenings when the cold was too deep for anything else. The letters were not professional, but they were careful, cut deep into the stone with the patience of a man who understood that some debts can only be paid in time and attention. Margaret Ann Mercer, beloved wife, brave woman, she fought for this land. 1845 to 1868. Hannah placed the wildflowers at the base of the stone. She knelt on the grass and spoke quietly, the way you speak to someone you have never met but feel you know through the shape they left in the world. You tried to protect this place before I ever set foot on it. You wrote that letter. You stood your ground, and they killed you for it. Not because you were weak, because you were dangerous. She paused. The wind moved through the oak branches above her, making a sound like breathing. I almost made your mistake. I almost tried to fight alone. Spent my whole life thinking that was what strong meant, carrying everything by myself and calling it courage, when really it was just fear. Fear that if I let someone help me, if I let someone in, they would see how tired I was, how scared, how much I wanted someone to say, "You do not have to do this by yourself." She touched the stone gently. But I learned, maybe from you, maybe from this place, maybe from the man we both married, who is stubborn and secretive and terrified of his own anger, and also the best man I have ever known. I learned that being strong does not mean being solitary. It means letting someone stand beside you. Even when you are afraid they will see the parts of you that are not brave at all. She stood up, brushed the dirt from her knees. I will take care of him, Margaret. Not because he needs it. He is the most capable man in this territory. But because everyone deserves someone who chooses to stay. He chose me. I chose him back. And I choose this land, and this life, and every hard, beautiful, brutal thing that comes with it. Rest easy. You are not forgotten. And the man who hurt you will never hurt anyone again. Hannah turned from the grave, and there was Caleb, on the porch, coffee in hand, watching her with those winter sky eyes that were not cold anymore, that had not been cold for a long time. He did not call out, did not intrude, just stood there, patient, steady, present, the way he stood for everything, like a fence post driven deep into Montana ground, built to last through any weather. Hannah walked toward him, across the yard that she swept each morning, past the garden she had planted in April, already showing green rows of beans and tomatoes and the herbs she dried from the kitchen rafters. Along the fence she had mended herself, wire tight, spacing even, the way her grandfather taught her a lifetime ago in another world. The porch steps were solid under her boots. Caleb had built them himself when he built this house. And they would stand for another 50 years, because that was how Caleb Mercer built things. For keeps. He handed her a cup of coffee. Their fingers brushed in the exchange. The same simple contact that had happened 1,000 times in the months since she arrived. But it still meant something. It still carried the weight of two people who chose each other with open eyes and kept choosing every morning, every day, through every storm. Talking to Margaret, he said, telling her the truth, seemed like the right thing to do. What truth? That her husband is a stubborn, secretive, overprotective man with a dangerous temper and terrible communication skills. Caleb's mouth twitched. The closest thing to a smile he allowed himself before his first cup of coffee. Anything else? That he is also the best man I have ever known, and that I am not going anywhere. He set down his coffee on the porch rail, took her face in both hands, those scarred, calloused hands that had built a ranch from dirt, that had dug a grave in frozen ground, that had beaten a man nearly to death and learned, in the hardest way possible, that violence was not the same as strength. I love you, Hannah Mercer, not because you are useful, not because you saved the ranch, not because you are the toughest woman in Montana, though Lord knows you might be. He paused. I love you, because you looked at every ugly truth about me and this life and you stayed. You stayed and you fought and you made this place something Margaret would be proud of. She would be proud of you too, Caleb. You let someone in after everything. That is the bravest thing you have ever done. He kissed her, slow and deep and certain. The kind of kiss that is not a beginning or an ending, but a continuation. The kiss of two people who know exactly who they married, flaws and scars and all, and would make the same choice again tomorrow without a moment of hesitation. When they finally pulled apart, Hannah leaned into him, her head against his chest, his arm around her shoulders. They stood together on the porch and looked out over their ranch. Spring morning in Montana, sage and wind and the distant call of a meadowlark. Cattle moving in the near pasture. Smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney where Sam was probably burning the coffee the way he always did. Liberty standing at the corral fence, ears pricked forward, waiting for Hannah the way she waited every morning. And beyond all of it, the mountains. Rising against a sky so vast it made you understand why people used the word forever, even though they knew it was a lie. Because in moments like this, standing on ground you fought for beside someone you chose with clear eyes and a full heart, forever did not feel like a lie at all. It felt like a promise. Hannah Mercer closed her eyes, felt the sun on her face and her husband's heartbeat under her palm, and the solid pine boards of the porch beneath her boots. She thought about a night that seemed like a lifetime ago, a storm in Virginia, a desperate father rehearsing his pitch in the mirror. Choose the pretty one. And a man who rode through that storm, walked into a rotting parlor, looked past the beauty queen in the lamplight, and saw the shadow in the corner. The one with dirt under her nails and fire in her eyes. The one nobody chose. The one everybody overlooked. The one who had been holding up a collapsing world with her bare hands for so long, she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. He did not rescue her. That was the part her father never would have understood. He opened a door. She walked through it. And then she built herself a life on the other side. Not a fairy tale. Something better. Something real. Built from honest work and hard truth. And the kind of love that does not arrive on horseback in a thunderstorm but grows slowly, like grass after a fire, from the blackened ground of two broken people who decided to mend each other instead of themselves. She was not the pretty one. She was not the chosen one. She was not the rescued one. She was the one who walked through the fire and came out the other side holding everything that mattered. Not because someone saved her, but because she finally did the most radical thing a woman raised to be invisible could do. She saved herself. And then she let someone love her for it. The wind came off the mountains, carrying sage and summer, and Hannah Mercer, standing exactly where she belonged, smiled. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.